Well, good afternoon to all of those who are joining us for Prosperion's EDU. Um, this is an opportunity to share with our clients and friends different resources that are not necessarily tied to investing, but hopefully enable you to um, live a little better, have a little better life. I'd like to maybe start off. First off, my name is Steve Breen, and I'm the owner, founder, and partner here with Prosperion Financial Advisors. We just have a great team of advisors here, and likewise team members who love to serve our clients. And this is just one example of that. Just to remind you, this is recorded, so will be available probably in a week or so. We'll send a reminder out in case you have to drop off or want to re-listen to something that our speaker is going to be covering. If you have any questions, you can email those into me, steve.boren, Booren, at lpl.com. And those questions as they come in, we'll make sure that Ed receives those or that we respond back to those in some fashion. Our speaker today is Ed Bassett. I've known Ed for 15, maybe 20 years. He is a client of ours, and Ed became a client early on. I think it was 20 some years ago. He was a partner and an innovator in a company, a local cybersecurity company, back before cybersecurity maybe was popular, a company called Cyber. And Ed has since that company went through some changes, and Ed has moved on and now does independent consulting for hospitals, some foundations. So he's very involved in this space. A little story that just happened on Monday. I received an email, random email from someone that said, gee, I'm interested in a financial advisor. I'd like to engage you, and I'm interested in your services. I need your advice. I'd like to have you manage our portfolio. And he was describing himself in this email, 10 million roughly in investable financial assets, described he and his wife in retirement, wants growing income. So clearly he knew or had some semblance of what we do, and really kind of fits right with what we do and the type of clients that we serve. And then he, in the email, he said, I'm providing you a summary of our statements in this Google attachment, and you just go to the link and you can see what's there. And I read that and I thought, well, that's unusual that someone would, from not even speaking with us, be wanting to share his financial statements. So, the suspicion meter went way up. And come to find out, this was someone who is phishing and trying to get into our network, into our system. LPL does a fabulous job supervising and surveilling things like this, and gives us tools to be able to prevent that. And how apropos that would come up today, or excuse me, on Monday, just 4 days before today's session on cybersecurity. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Ed and let Ed take it away. Again, if you have questions, you can email those to steve.boren, Booren, at lpl.com. And Ed, we'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate the intro, and I like the story. It's a similar tactic to what we're going to talk about today. You noticed it because the suspicion meter went up, and we're going to talk about how some of these scammers have come up with techniques to sort of suppress that suspicion meter, to keep even smart people like you from noticing what they're doing until it's too late. And I think that's the real insidious part of what we're gonna talk about. These are some very sophisticated, high stakes scams, and we want to increase everybody's literacy on how those scams work and how to identify them. These are scams that are designed to steal large amounts of money, including up to and including your full life savings. So these are not the quick hit, I want to take a few $100s kind of scam. These are the bigger ones. We've seen them on the rise. Anyone can be targeted, but we've seen them disproportionately targeting the 60 plus population. So today we're going to talk about how to reduce your vulnerability to those scams. And if you should be unfortunate enough to be targeted, we want to help minimize any financial losses, and also, how to help others in your circle, maybe aging parents, less tech savvy friends, peers not fortunate enough to be able to attend the Prosperion EDU sessions. These are great sessions. So thank you, Steve, and others for putting them on. My name is Ed Bassett. I co-authored this presentation about a year ago, working with my colleague Brian Giblin. We were triggered by seeing some examples of very large losses, and having spent my career in the cybersecurity business, this was a little shocking to me, right? This was a step up from what I was seeing over the previous years, and so it got my attention, and I wanted to take a look at it and try to help people to identify and prevent these kind of scams from succeeding. As Steve mentioned, I've been a Prosperion client for about 25 years. I started in the cybersecurity business in the mid 80s, before it had a name, which was good. It's been a good career move for me. The cybersecurity risk management, I've been operating as a chief information security officer and an advisor, primarily for healthcare, government, and financial services. So a big piece of my job is making sure that cyber defenses keep up with the latest criminal techniques. And mostly what I focus on are protecting organizations from cybercrime. But I also do advisory work for healthcare providers that are serving vulnerable populations. And that's kind of what got me into this particular space, was helping some elder care providers to help their patients and clients to have better success in defending against these. Prosperion clients generally fit the target profile for these fraud schemes, being older and more affluent. And so that's definitely the target of what we're seeing. And I hope that what we talk about today is going to decrease their success rate. That's my fervent hope. I'm pushing the button, but it's not going forward. What's happening? There we go. So today we're going to talk about the scope of this problem in terms of number of victims and dollars lost, just to give you an idea of how this is hitting the United States population. We're going to discuss the kinds of fraud techniques that are being used. We're going to talk about how to defend yourself and your family, both preventative steps and then after the fact response. As Steve mentioned, please send your questions in. I think we'll be taking the questions at the end, but if they're emailed in, hopefully Steve or someone on his side can read those out, and we'll have a chance to answer them on the air. And if not, we'll answer them after the fact. We've got 60 minutes. I definitely, if you have a question or a story about some of this happening to you, be interested to hear that as much as we can fit into this 60-minute segment today. I want to start with a little bit of a case study. This is the original article that got me researching this in some detail. It was in the Washington Post. Now it's been probably 18 months or so since this was written, but it detailed the account of a woman named Frances Sharples. She is a multi-PhD retired White House science advisor, who was scammed out of $655,000. That was a big number, and it got my attention, and it should get yours too. Smart person, very capable, able person, but still, tragically lost a big percentage of her life savings to a very devious scam that really triggered, primal fear, using adrenaline to overpower rational judgment long enough for her to make some, life-altering decisions. So the story here is that Frances Sharples had a pop-up screen appear on her computer saying that her identity had been stolen and providing a number for her to call Microsoft for help. The screen, of course, is a fake. She had perhaps visited a malicious website. Maybe she mistyped a search term. Maybe she was served a tainted advertisement. That sort of tech support fraud, call Microsoft for help. It's a common scheme. It's been around for many years. And a few years ago, she would likely have been misled into thinking her computer had viruses and maybe paid $200 or $300 for a fake technician to clean up the alleged infection. But today, the stakes are much higher and they're going after a bigger target. In Frances's case, they were after bank and brokerage accounts containing her life savings, including her retirement accounts. So she calls the number, Frances calls the number, and a man identifying himself as a Microsoft employee advises her that both her computer and her bank account have been compromised. He stoked her fear. He generated urgency by saying that the crooks had already attempted to withdraw funds from her account. This guy being very helpful, the fake Microsoft tech support person walked her through the process of allowing him to have remote access to control her computer. This is a pretty common technique for a tech support person, so not unusual in and of itself. He also advised her to call her bank. And the call to her bank was rerouted and answered by a second scammer posing as a member of the anti-fraud department of her bank. So the second scammer really spikes her adrenaline by confirming that there have been attempted withdrawals from her bank account. He terrified her by saying that she could lose all her money. And so she's primed to follow the instructions of the two purported saviors, right? The Microsoft tech support rep, the fake bank rep. The bank rep offers to help her protect her money by moving it to a safe place. He helps her to open an account at a cryptocurrency exchange where she can safely stash her money. And you may be saying, that's a pretty big red flag, the cryptocurrency exchange. But in the moment, when you're scared that you're going to lose your money, help is help, and you're confused and you don't know what's going to happen. So I think that's the key. Meanwhile, the fake Microsoft support person stays on the line, listening in, and supposedly is working behind the scenes to remove malware infection from her computer. So he's told her that there's something wrong and he's going to be in there fixing it. So while one scammer is harvesting her personal information off her computer using the remote access that she provided, the other one is giving her scripted instructions to take to her bank to transfer the funds from her savings account to this new cryptocurrency account. The scammers don't want to trigger anti-fraud protections that are in place at the bank, so they tell Frances what to say if she's asked. If anyone is instructing her or forcing her to make the transactions, she's supposed to say no. She's doing it all on her own. And just in case of any trouble, the scammer stays on the cell phone line the entire time so he can hear the transactions and maybe give her some advice. So she moves $25,000 from her savings account to her new cryptocurrency account. She's able to see an email confirmation of the transfers on her computer. So she can see that the money was moved successfully to this new account. What she doesn't get to see is the email confirmations a few seconds later showing that same money moving out of that account and into the scammer's account, leaving her new account empty. And the tech support scammer is using his access to her computer to delete those messages as soon as they come in, so she stays in the dark. The scam goes on over the course of 2 weeks. The two scammers progressed from the savings account to a retirement account. A fraud investigator from the brokerage called Frances to double check on her request to withdraw all her funds. He asked her, "Is someone else telling you to do this?" She follows the script provided by the scammers and said it was her decision. She transferred $630,000 from her retirement account to her savings account and then to her cryptocurrency account. As before, the scammers moved the money into their own account, leaving hers empty, but they blocked her from seeing those transaction confirmations. The scheme stopped when the scammers went after a second retirement account. This time, Frances told the brokerage firm's fraud investigator what was happening, and the whole scheme unraveled. But she'd already lost $655,000, and salt in the wound, she later owes taxes on the retirement withdrawal because it was taken out of a tax-deferred account, so that's a taxable withdrawal. After the fact, Frances reported to the Washington Post, "I wasn't thinking clearly. Looking back," she said, she could see several red flags. So why had she been duped, right? Why did she fall for this? Combination of fear and trust. She feared losing her money, and she trusted the help being offered by Microsoft and her bank. So that story is one of many. And I got some statistics on the screen that are from the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. They publish an annual report. This one is from April of 2025, showing some of the statistics of this kind of crime. Dramatic increase in both complaints, which are the blue solid bar, and the losses, which are the yellow bars. So the complaints have gone up, but the real shocker is the the dollar value of the losses, more than quadrupled, right? In 2020, about $4 billion. In 2024, $16 billion. So quadrupled in a four-year period of time. If we look at the age groups, we'll see that no age group is excluded from these schemes, but that people over 60 are by far suffering the greatest losses from cybercrime. So they suffered about 40% of the losses in the statistics from the FBI, yet that age group is only about 25%, about a quarter of the population. In 2023, the average loss was about 34,000. This year, 2024, this year of this report was 83,000. So more than doubled in a 1-year period. The criminals have figured out how to extract these larger payoffs. So now they're repeating these schemes and they're expanding these schemes. And that's why I want to talk today about how they do it and how to stop them. So let's dig in a little deeper and talk about how they're doing this, right? So there's any number of scams that you may hear. The phishing you heard from Steve, that example, right? Just a simple email trying to get you to click a link and do something you probably shouldn't do. Identity theft, credit card check fraud, non-payment, non-delivery, investment fraud, extortion, spoofing, right? There's all kinds of scams out there. But today we're going to dig in specifically on these high stakes fraud schemes that are going after older, more affluent members of our community. There's 2 slides of these, so we're not going to go into detail on all of the techniques, but I want to focus really on the first 2. These are the ones that have been causing the most serious financial losses. So tech support scam, I mentioned earlier, started out as kind of a small-time scam, a couple $100 to eradicate non-existent computer viruses. A lot of people fell for it. It was pretty simple. If you got victimized, again, not life-changing, not that big a deal. That's now the starting point for these emptying your bank account, right? It's a starting point for a larger scam. The losses from tech support fraud, that particular type of fraud in 2024 on the FBI report, 982 million for those ages 60 plus, 137 million for all other ages combined. So by far, by almost order of magnitude, targeting 60 plus population. Not surprising. I didn't get a smartphone until I was 45. So, this is all, the technology is newer and we're less comfortable with it than the younger generations. So that's where they're going with this scam. The second one is a government impersonation scam. Originally, they were using this sort of shocking fear tactic, threat of prosecution. You're going to get arrested. You're going to get thrown in jail. They're trying to trick victims into making a one-time payment, smash and grab kind of thing. Now, again, it's a supporting role in a larger stakes con that we're going to talk about how these get combined together. This one also disproportionately targeting the older population. Total losses from government impersonation, 200 million for ages 60 plus, 100 million for all other ages combined. So not quite as lopsided as the tech support, but still, definitely going after that age group quite a bit more. Some of the scams on this second page still happening out there, right? Not getting as much press. They're not typically as much of the stakes. The last one I want to mention is the family or caregiver scam. This is something where the victim and the criminal know each other, the perpetrator know each other in some way. And although those are very difficult situations, they require a very different sort of detection and intervention strategy than we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk today about fraud that's perpetrated by strangers, people you don't know, have never met, never will meet. I do want to mention a little bit before I leave this sort of list of frauds is the idea of investment fraud, right? So deceptive practices that get you to make a purchase of an investment based on false information. Those get some pretty big press, pretty big losses on the FBI statistics. But I know, this is an audience of Prosperion clients, right? You've already opted out of that risk pool. You're not out there buying shady investments. You've got good advisors. You know who you can trust and who you cannot trust. So I think that fraud technique, although it is fairly common, it does target this demographic, is not one that we are particularly susceptible to, I think. So how do they combine those techniques to make it into a bigger stake, long con kind of attack? This is a graphic put together by the FBI that kind of shows the combination of techniques in a thing they've dubbed this the phantom hacker scam. Um, this has been the common denominator. If we look at cases where there's large dollar value losses, this is the one. This is the technique that's had the most success for the criminals. This is what happened to Francis Sharples in the case study that we did. So let's walk through that in a little bit of the phases that happened there. So phase one, a tech support imposter, right? Somebody posing as tech support or customer support from a legitimate company contacts the victim. They can call you, you can call them through a pop-up on your computer or some other method of responding to a text message. Once they've got you on the phone, they're going to direct you typically to download a software program, giving them remote access to your computer. They're going to pretend to run a virus scan. They're going to say you've been hacked. They're going to try to offer to fix that. They're also going to try to get you to open your financial accounts, or at least show you where those financial accounts are, typically under the guise of looking for unauthorized charges. Let's see if anybody has made any attempts. So let's go look at the financial history. Based on them now knowing what your accounts are, they're going to choose some accounts to target, and they're going to try to get you in touch with a member of the fraud department from that bank. So that starts phase two. We've got a financial system and a financial institution imposter, someone posing as a representative of a bank or financial institution that you work with, is going to come in and contact you, and they're also going to say your accounts have been accessed by a foreign hacker or some other bad thing, and that you need to move your money to a safe place. Typically, that's going to be an account with the Federal Reserve or some other U.S. government agency. So invoking the fact that you may trust the government, that you would move the money to some safe place where it can be immune from this purported theft that's happening. And they're going to direct you to move that money with wire transfer, cash. We've seen actual cash from an ATM schemes, cryptocurrency, maybe multiple transactions spread out over a period of days and months. They're also going to inform the victim in this phase not to inform anyone of the reason they're moving their money, right? There's a whole story around why this must be kept a secret. And then in phase three is the U.S. government imposter. So this is typically a contact from a third scammer that's posing to be an employee of the Federal Reserve, the IRS, another U.S. government agency, maybe the FBI. If the victim becomes suspicious of the government imposter, they're going to send email or letter that has an official U.S. government looking letterhead to try to gain some credibility. They continue to emphasize that the funds are unsafe and they must be moved into this new account for protection, and they keep after this until you agree to move some money. So that's the basic setup. So let's talk a little bit about some of the common tactics that are used in these scams, right? Always the objective is stealing money, so not a big surprise. The criminals are organized into teams. I mentioned some are these sort of smash and grab robbers, but some are playing this longer con. They've researched their victims. Steve mentioned in his story that he told at the beginning of the call that they had quoted things off of the Prosperion website. They had done their research. They knew who they were contacting, and they knew the client profile that was served by Prosperion. So that's not uncommon for them to have done that research and know a little bit about you. That helps build trust. It also is a good way to establish fear if you know some things that might spark fear. Let's dig into a little bit of how those things play off each other, the trust and the fear. So first, I want to do a little bit of sort of myth busting, right? So some expect that these are these sort of high-tech hacker scams. They're going to exploit some weakness in your computer. Maybe you've set it up wrong. Maybe you did the wrong thing, and now you're going to get hacked. I'll say these scams we're talking about today are very low-tech scams. These hackers don't have the skills to do the kind of high-tech hacking, right? They're manipulating the victim's psyche, not the victim's computer. That is the number one thing, right? They're social scams that are going after you with words, not viruses and those kind of things. They're preying on fears of a hacker attack, and they might create a false narrative about compromised computers and compromised identities and compromised accounts, but they're not actually able to pull these off. They can't just go steal the money by breaking into your computer and then your bank account. They need the victims to let them in. And that's the key as we talk about how to defend against them, is that they need the victim's cooperation for these scams to play out. So if these folks had the high-tech skills, they would all go get jobs working for China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, right? These are the people that are out there stealing our national security secrets. They're the elite hackers. That's where those folks are working. The ones we're dealing with in these scams, they're not at that level. And sadly, we've seen some reports recently that a lot of the perpetrators here may in fact be often human trafficking victims. There's been some scam farms in Myanmar that have been broken up over the last couple of weeks. This has all just happened over the last few days, as I was preparing for this presentation, where the Myanmar military is going in and breaking up these farms and letting tens of thousands of human trafficking victims, loose and kind of repatriating them back to their families. Folks that have been lured into Myanmar on the promise of some job, and when they get there, they're trapping them in these compounds in the middle of nowhere and forcing them to do these scams. So interestingly, where we think of the scammers as the bad guys, they're themselves victims in some case. So all of this orchestrated by organized crime rings. So these scammers, they spend their time talking, right? Phone, email, text with the victim. They're going to frighten the victim. They're going to build trust. They're going to convince them to fork over money. But again, a very social scam. The other thing we've seen is the extension of time, trying to get the scam to hold up for days, weeks, sometimes over a month of time of the letting the scam kind of play out. And time involving hours and hours of phone and computer contact with their victims. So that's been the biggest change, I think, in recent, is that goal of keeping the ruse intact long enough to go after the big accounts. Nobody's going to transfer hundreds of thousands of dollars in 5 minutes. It takes a while to get to that point, and they've learned how to do that. So I've mentioned trust and fear a few different times, right? The trust comes from impersonating a known organization, often a government, bank, computer company, almost always Microsoft. That's the name everybody knows. That's the computer that these scammers all have in their house and trained on. The fear comes from threats that produce an adrenaline surge. So unless you are trained in special forces or SWAT team, if you are, I thank you for your service, but most of us are not. And we're not trained to operate under the influence of adrenaline. We don't know how to do it. It's not something we experience very often in our lives. So that adrenaline makes tunnel vision, literally and figuratively. It prioritizes action over caution. It renders us incapable of careful analysis. So this is by design, right? Evolutionary design, intelligent design, however you believe that came to be. When we are at risk of mortal consequences, the adrenaline triggers our best survival instincts. When a scammer fabricates the consequences, that adrenaline response isn't as helpful as it is when we're being chased by a tiger or something. So almost all these scams that we're going to talk about today unravel quickly, instantly, really, when rational thought happens. So the scammers know how to suppress that rational thought. So they're not just going after people who are incapable of rational thought. That would be too hard. There's not that many of them. There's certainly some folks out there that are simply, unable to detect this. But most normal, rational adults could figure out these scams if they weren't under the heavy influence of adrenaline. And so it's a key part of their technique. They're going to threaten, they're going to cajole, they're going to do things to keep people engaged and not thinking clearly. And specifically, they want to make sure that you don't talk to someone else, because that someone else, whoever it may be, isn't under the adrenaline influence, and they're going to see through the scam almost instantly. So when we get to the defenses, we'll talk about how to cause that to happen, even in the sort of fog of war, if you will. At the end of all these schemes, money's going to move to an account controlled by the perpetrator. There's some pretty sophisticated techniques for doing that. Fake bank websites that disguise the true balances, so you can see a balance that doesn't reflect what's actually in your account. Manipulating emails, I mentioned that in the Frances Sharples example, where they email confirmations, they filtered them so she only saw the good ones, not the bad ones. Verbal gaslighting, these are all techniques to make sure that you believe this is okay when in fact, obviously, it's not. want to mention real briefly the automated customer account transfer service, ACATS. This is a system used behind the scenes of brokerage accounts to move securities between accounts. So if you open a new account, you want to transfer to your new account, this is how the money gets moved. Scammers have figured out how to open accounts in the name of their victim. It's relatively easy now to open an account online. You provide some basic information and the account gets opened. What's hard is getting the money to move, right? You have to trick the old account into moving the money to the new account using the ACAT system. And that's where the fear and trust are used to get the information on the real account that's needed to make that transfer start, make it happen. So all this sounds pretty scary, I'm sure, and it is. So let's talk about what you can do both from preventive and a response. So we'll start with the prevention. How can you prevent the scams from getting started? You can't prevent yourself from being targeted. It'll happen or it won't. But you can identify them and stop them before they get down the path where you've actually lost some money. So first and foremost is awareness, right? So we have some FBI public service announcements and other materials linked in this presentation. I think for those links to work, we'll send out some copies after to the folks who attended and make sure that you have a chance to click those links and go read about that a little bit. We're going to dive deeper into some everyday precautions and then around your online access, making sure you've got that sort of well protected. And then we're going to talk about how you can make sure you have lines of communication open so that there's communication during one of these things, right? Even with the adrenaline that I mentioned, that there's some communication with another party. That's going to be the key to stopping these in their tracks. So a few everyday practices. Spam calls, fact of life. We all grew up when all the calls were unknown until you had to answer the call and find out who it was. Now we've got caller ID. Great to not answer calls that are not expected. It saves on the sales pitches, but it also saves on these scams, right? So a lot of these scams are going to start with some unsolicited contact. Again, it could be phone, text, email, lots of different methods, but if you never take that call, then you never engage with their, maybe they move on to someone else, and you never get even in the conversation. Links that are provided to you. Steve mentioned in his story about that phishing. It had a link in there. I guarantee if he clicked that link, it did not go to somebody's bank statements. It went somewhere else. So convincing you to click a link, Steve did the right thing. It was from an unsolicited place. He had no reason to trust it. So don't click. Be suspicious, right? Find another way to contact and find out what's going on. If you didn't look the link up and you didn't request it, don't trust it. Use some other method to find out what's happening there. Scammers often impersonate sort of known organizations, right? So we talk about Microsoft, banks, the government. When you initiate the contact, certainly those are known, trusted entities. When they contact you, you don't know if it's really them and certainly should not trust them. So they're going to try to make sure that you're following their instructions to make the contact happen. We talked about these scams unraveling in the light of anyone else looking at it, right? Anyone who's not under the adrenaline influence, who sees what's going on, is going to instantly see the red flags and stop. So the scammers are going to do everything in their power to prevent that from happening. So very important is to establish some kind of standard practice that you will ask for help immediately when something confusing, unexpected, scary, suspicious sounding happens. Everyone I've interviewed that's talked about this from a victim perspective says, I didn't want to bother anyone. And that's just such a very common feeling to say, I just thought I could handle it myself. I thought I should handle it myself. And although that's generally good to be self-sufficient, I was certainly raised that way. I live that way. I'm sure a lot of you do. Contacting someone else is the number one way to stop these scams cold nearly every time, right? There's no way for these scammers to loop in a second person and somehow convince them as well. It just doesn't happen. As soon as you pick up the phone and call somebody, the scam is over. So it's important to keep that in mind and goes against that sort of natural inclination to say, I don't want to bother anyone. Um, I want to keep this piece on the passwords really short because I know in the previous Prosperion.edu session, this was talked about in some detail. I'll say only that passwords still matter, although we're starting to move away from reliance on passwords for a lot of access. Um, we all still have 1,000 of them or 100, at least hundreds of them that we have to keep track of. Um, there's some information on the screen about how to choose those. The number one thing I would say is keep them in a password manager. That can be a piece of paper that you store securely at your home. It could be a piece of software like Bitwarden is the one I recommend. I have good experience with it. It's free for personal use. So one of those two ways to keep the passwords, don't keep them just lying around on your computer. Don't store them in your browser. Don't store them on a spreadsheet or a Word document because once someone has access, and we talked about how the tech support people can get that access, um, they're going to search and find those pretty quick. And but they're going to have a lot more trouble breaking into your home to steal a piece of paper, and they won't do that. They don't live in this country, and they're going to have a lot more trouble breaking into a password vault because they're well protected. So that's the number one thing I think I would say there. Um, Also, for logging into your accounts, the two-step login. This is becoming much more common. I know a Prosperion account view has it. Almost any bank or financial institution is going to have a two-step login. All the social medias and email accounts now have it. But often you have to take time and effort to set it up. It's often not forced on you, it's offered to you. So my suggestion is take the time to set that up. It greatly changes the impact if someone is able to get a copy of your passwords. And so having that two-step login, very important to do. Um, I think next is to look at alerts and notifications. Make sure that you're taking advantage of all that your financial institutions, your banks, et cetera, have to offer. So when you're working with an advisor-centric firm like Prosperion, personal contact, very common. Prosperion uses voice verification to confirm if you're making a request or you're doing an ACAT transfer or something like that. They're going to reach out and have a conversation with you. So that great technique. And LPL reported when we were doing some research for this presentation that they have experienced no significant losses from sort of ACAT fraud to date, right? That the checks that are being done are sufficient to make sure that they know what's happening there. And if there is a problem, they can retract those transactions. But for your more online centric accounts where you don't have the advantage of personal contact like you might get at an advisor centric firm, ask if they have a trusted contact option, something where they will reach out to a third party if they spot suspicious activities. This is not the same as giving your kids access to your account, which you may not be comfortable to do. If you are, then that's great. But if you're not, the trusted contact is a way for them to, without revealing any of your details, for them to trigger a third party with some red flags and say, hey, this is happening, you should know. And then that third party can reach out to you and try to find out what's going on. So that's a very useful feature if they offer it. If the account holder is being coached to move money without telling anyone, this is designed to help do that, to help counter that. You do have to take time to set it up in advance, though, right? It's not a reactive thing. It's something you have to do in preparation. Also, most accounts now, credit cards, those sort of things, will have alert options for unusual transactions, maybe all transactions. I think it's good to set that up going to a third party if you have someone that you trust, a spouse, a child, a friend who you don't mind seeing some of those details. You could set it to a fairly high number and say, all right, anything over $1,000 or whatever threshold you want to set. But that way, if somebody does see something that seems unusual, hopefully, again, they'll call you. And maybe if you're in the adrenaline fog, they're going to call you and say, hey, I just saw this alert. What's going on? Freezing credit, very important to do if you are not actively out there seeking new credit cards. If you're not the kind of person who gets new credit cards every week or two, it's very good practice to freeze your credit with Equifax, Experian, TransUnion. All three offer this for free. It's required by law. It's easy to do. You go to their website and set it up. No charge. when you do need to get some credit, so you go to buy a car or you go to get a new credit card, you have to unfreeze it to make that transaction possible. So there's a little bit of an inconvenience factor, but it's very high level of protection against identity theft. So highly recommend it if you haven't already done that. I mentioned a few times now about the importance of communication and getting a third party involved. So pre-establishing that is what makes that work, right? The scammers, as we know, are going to do their best to keep their victims from seeking help. They're going to use threats. They're going to create urgency, and your good judgment is going to be suppressed. So having established some kind of a buddy system, contact list ahead of time is going to be necessary. You're not going to think up something new in the middle of one of these things. It has to be established ahead of time. The scammers often make threats about anyone you contact. They're going to get arrested. They're going to get jailed. They're going to become part of this thing that you're involved in, and it's a bad thing. And they're going to be in trouble if you call them and tell them what's going on. So it's good with that buddy system to agree that those threats are not real and they're going to be ignored. And the person says, "I will go to jail for you." But the pro tip here is, no one's really going to jail, right? We all know that. And we know it when we set it up ahead of time, but it doesn't seem like it in the moment. So having that discussion ahead of time is fairly important. And I think also good to make sure you've got this written down on a sheet that's handy. And again, that could be on your computer, could be on your desk, on a piece of paper, however is convenient for you to get access to it. This is not just who your contact is for helping you with a fraud, but who you might call for tech support. So if you're getting a tech support offer on your computer, instead of accepting that offer from some anonymous person who's out to get you, call the person that you've identified ahead of time as your tech support person. Bank numbers, if someone calls you and says they're from the tech support company or the anti-fraud department of your bank, tell them, "Thank you very much. I'm going to call my bank right now," and then use this phone number, right? So if it really was your bank's fraud department, you'll be in touch with the right person. If it wasn't, you'll have averted that potential crime. So having a call sheet and using that as your primary reference, even when you're offered other numbers and other links to click and saying, "No, I'm going to go ahead and use these numbers because I know that they're truthful," is a very good defensive scheme. So let's shift now to what to do if this happens. If you find yourself in the middle of one of these things and you need to stop it, you need to recover from it. So I'm going to start with a story. This is a true story. The name of the bank and the name of the victim have been changed, but this is an actual story with true details. So this is my friend James. He lives in Durango. He called me last year after realizing he'd been scammed. It started with this text message: "From the Best Bank fraud department. We suspect fraud on your Best Bank account. We see an attempted withdrawal of $1,000. Did you make this withdrawal? If not, please call us right away." So James is a Best Bank customer. He had not made a withdrawal, so he called the number. So I think everybody kind of realizes he is calling a fake number, right? If he had called the real number, he could have gotten right to the bottom of this, but he didn't. He called the number in the text message. And no surprise, he's talking to the scammers. The scammer identifies himself as the Best Bank fraud department representative. He says, "Thank you for calling. Let's check on the suspect transaction. What's your name? What's your account number? What are the last four digits of your social?" All the personal details. "What number can I call you back on if we get disconnected?" "Okay, thanks, James. Okay, I see here the attempted withdrawal. It's fortunately been blocked by our anti-fraud software, so they didn't actually get your money, but someone is definitely trying to take your money. These fraudsters must have compromised your identity somehow, and they tend to move pretty fast. So if we act quickly, we can stop them. I'm going to place a block on your Best Bank accounts, but if you have money in any other accounts, it'll still be at risk. I'm going to text you a link, and then I can help you look through and lock down your other accounts, hopefully before any transactions get through." So James, he's a little panicked, right? He wants to protect his accounts. He's a little suspicious because he doesn't know where any of this is coming from. And he's told me he would have checked with his wife, but she was volunteering at a local bookstore and he didn't want to bother her. There's that phrase again, right? Didn't want to bother her. So he didn't call his wife. He went ahead and clicked the link, after which the fake bank rep is coaching him to log into his other non-best bank accounts to check for fraudulent activities. They go through account after account, and they didn't see anything wrong, fortunately. After a short while, James gets even more suspicious and he decides to hang up, realizing it's probably not right. So in the background, while they were talking, the scammers had taken over his Apple ID account. They had changed his login and credentials, because remember, he clicked the link, so he let them into his phone. They changed his login credentials. They changed his recovery contacts. He had some passwords stored in his browser. They were able to gain access to an investment account and transfer out $1,500. So all this is happening at kind of lightning speed, right? He only was on the phone with them for a few minutes, but they're moving really quick. Now his phone is prompting him for an Apple ID login, which he puts in the password, but it doesn't work. So he realizes now that he's locked out of his phone, that he's been scammed. So he gets on his computer and he starts changing passwords on his financial accounts. He contacts Apple to try to get access to his Apple ID and his iCloud storage. He eventually was unable to regain access. So he couldn't get access to his phone, couldn't get access to Apple ID because the scammers had changed all the reset and recovery contacts. So he couldn't prove his identity to Apple. So he ended up having to buy a new phone. He ended up having to create a new Apple account. He lost the $1,500. He lost the 5,000 pictures stored on his Apple cloud storage. And he lost many, many hours of his time kind of picking up the pieces. When I interviewed him, he told me he considered himself somewhat lucky that he hadn't lost more of his money, right? Because he hung up after just that first round. He contacted me while this was, just fresh, to help advise him on the recovery process, and that took a lot of time for him and his wife over the next 2 weeks or so. And so, on the next few slides, I'm going to walk through some of those recovery steps and the priorities, like what order to do things in if this happens. So I'm going to start with a little mnemonic for, if a scammer gives you a call, right? What's the first thing to do? And stop. So seek a trusted opinion, terminate the conversation, official contact lookup, and prevent future contact. So let's go through those real quick. When we say out loud to someone else what the scammer is saying, it's pretty obvious to them and maybe to us, right? Blazingly obvious in hindsight. So number one is get someone else involved. Seek a trusted opinion. So if my friend James, for instance, had called his wife before doing any of this other stuff, this never would have gotten off the ground. Terminate the conversation, right? Hang up the phone. My friend James did do that. As soon as he realized that this was a little suspicious, he hung up, which was good because he lost $1,500 instead of much, much more. Looking up a contact. So instead of clicking the link or calling a number that is provided to you, if you call a real number, if he had called his actual bank, then James, again, wouldn't have gone anywhere. He would have called his bank and his bank would have said, no, everything looks fine. So then he would have realized it was a scam right away. And lastly, prevent future contact. So blocking phone numbers, email addresses. If you get something that's suspicious, you get phishing or scam calls, go ahead and hit the block so that you don't get more. The scammers sometimes are very persistent. If they try, it doesn't work. They may come back with the same story, different time. They have some exhaustion schemes where they try to wear you down. So all kinds of reasons to just block those numbers. If you do get victimized and you get far enough that something has happened, either access to your computer, access to your accounts, maybe money's even moved, you need to make sure that there's a very thorough cleanup. Don't make any assumptions about the extent of the fraud, right? So these folks are after money first and last. The fact that they stole some money doesn't mean they're not going to steal more money later. They may come back again at a future time. You should engage all your resources, your friends, your family, your trusted tech support to help you with this. It's time consuming. You're going to end up fixing some things that maybe don't need to be fixed. It's better to be safe than sorry, right? Have a priority order. The crown jewels from a scammer perspective is gaining access to your accounts. So a password list, very valuable. So wherever you've got your passwords in a vault, on a spreadsheet, wherever, immediately move them somewhere else. Print them out, take them offline. you're going to change all your passwords anyway after a scam like this. So printing them out gives you something to go by and avoids the potential of the scammers getting access to other accounts while you're in the process of fixing it. It's going to take you a while to recover. So you got to block their access. If you're trying to prioritize things, start with your bank accounts, things that have money in them. That's often the first target because they're going to try to do withdrawals from a bank account. It's a lot easier than a brokerage account. So bank accounts first, then other financial accounts, which tend to have a little bit better protection on them. So do them second. Once your financial accounts are secured, look at your other phone and computer accounts, cloud storage, documents, photos, anything else that you've got, your email. Make sure you've blocked access to those by, changing the password, making sure the two-factor authentication is set up, the recovery emails are all pointing to you and not someone else. If you don't have a credit freeze, certainly do it now, because after a scam attack, they may have gathered enough information to try an identity theft attack. And the last thing I'll mention in the recovery priorities is contact law enforcement. So the chances of actually getting your money back if you've lost some are pretty slim, very slim actually, but that reporting helps law enforcement to find and stop these organized crime rings. It also helps build the statistics so we know where to focus our efforts. You may want to talk to a tax accountant, especially if you've lost money out of a tax sheltered account like an IRA or 401k, because you may need some assistance in avoiding paying tax on some money that was stolen. So do scammers make our life exciting, right? So one of the stories that I read in preparing for this presentation was a very detailed analysis in the New York Times about a fraud victim that was tricked into believing he was helping the FBI to solve a major international crime. So after losing his entire life savings, he admitted in the interview that he kept going because he was having fun and felt important. This was giving him a sense of purpose that was elusive to him in retirement. So don't be that guy. Don't give away all your money just because you want to be James Bond. I don't think that's a really good idea. So yes, these folks will try to scare you, but they also may involve you, right? So especially the government impersonation scheme, that phase may say, you're helping us to track down these bad criminals. So one, you're protecting your money. Two, you're helping us. This guy in the New York Times article, they showed him maps of them catching the bad guys. So they had a map on his computer that he could see them tracking these folks and catching them and throwing them in jail. And he felt like he was really a big part of the plan. Just to kind of wrap things up, I want to talk about how you can help fraud victims if it's not you that's victimized, but someone you know, a family member or a friend. First, I would say provide some comfort, right? They may feel guilt and shame. They may not want to talk about it. These are very sophisticated crimes. We've talked a lot about the techniques they use to bypass rational thought. So even careful, cautious people are being victimized. These can literally happen to anyone. They're not going after the weak. They're going after anyone who's not trained as a special forces or SWAT officer and has the whole adrenaline thing figured out. The next step is make sure the scam is over. So we've seen a bunch of examples of multiple phases spread out over a long period. So if you're hearing this story from a friend about a scam that happened to them last week, it may not be over. You may be hearing about it during the scam rather than after the scam. So try to find out as much as you can about what's going on and thinking about some of the stuff we talked about today. Make sure that they're aware that what happened last week might have been the start, not the finish. And make sure that you give them some advice on the recovery work to make sure that everything is kind of locked down. In many of the scams, it's not clear what exactly has been compromised. Did the scammer get all the passwords? Did they get access to your phone that's persistent? Do they have backdoor access to your computer, your cloud storage? It's just not clear what they might or might not have gotten access to. So following the priorities we talked about a minute ago, it's important for the victim to go through and really lock down every single account, every single computer password, account that they may have, reset those, make sure they're in good shape. A thorough cleanup job, and engaging a tech support specialist to help, especially if it's someone who's not able to do that themselves. Very, very good. And lastly, I would say, if you're talking to someone that's happened to hear the details of their story, share it with others, encourage them to share it with others. I think the more we all know about these techniques, the more resistant we are, right? The more it is likely that we will recognize them, even when we're scared and under pressure and that sort of thing. I'm going to put these resources on the screen. You can't click these obviously on the Zoom screen, so we're gonna send out after the fact to the folks who are attending. We're gonna send out these links so you can click on them. I mentioned earlier, the reporting is worth doing even if you're not going to get your money back. You can report to the FBI field office. I put the Denver contact information up here, and they also have online their Internet Crime and Complaint Center, IC3. It's just a website where you can report the details of the situation. I've included some brochures and public service announcements with some of the data that we had in today's presentation. And then on this next slide, some information about Microsoft, talking about how to detect these scams. Their name gets used a lot, so they want to help defend against them. Bitwarden, the password manager, password vault I mentioned, some instructions on how to do the credit freeze, and a little more deep dive on some of these specific techniques if you're interested in learning more about that. Got a
So
few
Ed,
minutes for some questions. So Steve, go back to you and see, do you have any questions from the attendees here today?
yes, there's kind of two items. First off is to have a mindset. So, we all have, we live in homes. Those homes have doors, especially a front door. There's usually a lock on the front door, and oftentimes there's a peephole or a window. When someone comes to your house, do you look through the peephole? Do you look through the window? Or do you just open the door? When you open the door, you're just letting in what could be a bad guy. I think you have to have the same sort of mindset when you think about your email. When you open up your email, you're inviting someone into your house. Now, the analogy of the house is maybe a little bit over the top, but just have the mindset to be careful not to open the door just for anybody. So a question that came up from two different people. One is LifeLock. Do you have any thoughts about LifeLock or Title Lock, Home Title Lock, anything along those lines?
Yeah, I think those kind of services are worthwhile. I'm not going to go as far as recommending a specific one because I haven't researched those in enough detail to say one's better than another. I think the number one thing would be a credit freeze, but then beyond that, you can do credit monitoring, you can do other sort of identity theft protections. I think you can get done what you need to get done for free. If you want the convenience of paying for a service, that's what you're buying, right? And it's not necessarily that you have to spend money to get the protection, but you get the convenience of somebody doing it for you, walking you through it. And I think that's what the value of those services. So if you hold your money real close, you can DIY it and get it done. If you want the convenience, then those are good services to investigate.
And then another one was on passwords and pattern passwords. And I think the point of this was, what are your thoughts about a pattern password? So it's a different password for each website that you go to.
You should definitely use a different password for each website, and that means you're never going to remember them all. So the idea that you come up with a pattern and you vary that pattern and you somehow remember which one is which, that's a terrible idea. Don't do that. Put your passwords in a vault, make them random, and have a different one for every account. Don't think about it. Don't memorize it. Don't type it in. So then you have one password that opens the vault, and that will fill in the password for all of your accounts. So then they can be 15, 20 characters long, random characters. Nobody's going to guess that. And you're not going to have to spend your time and energy remembering it. So yeah, if you're trying to come up with a cool way to make that work, It's a lot of work for you. It's no work for the bad guys. It's very easy for them to break those patterns. So yeah, use a vault, use different passwords for everything, make them random.
Wow, thank you. So thank you to all the attendees for today. There were 59 attendees. Wow. Um,
Yeah, thank you.
that is awesome. Thank you, Ed, for your expertise, your perspective, your ideas and tips to help us help our clients. We are very, very grateful for that. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is recorded so that it'll be available in about a week. We'll send out a reminder, and feel free to pass that along to friends, family members, folks that you care about. Um, we do this because we care about our clients. So thank you very much for your attendance today, and God bless you. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everyone who attended. I appreciate your time and attention.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.